My name is Gustavo. I'm an anthropologist and teacher in the Federal University of Mato Grosso do Sul in Corumbá. Corumbá is in the border with Bolivia, and I teach at the border, the master degree in border studies also. Well, when we talk about the migration, the Bolivian migration to Brazil, we can say that since the 90s, it's increasing each time more, basically to São Paulo. Before that, we have read some articles that the Bolivians used to go to Argentina, mainly Buenos Aires. Also, of course, to Europe and the United States, countries called the developed world. But since the Brazilian economy stabilized with the real, the coin, with the real in the 90s, with no inflation, is that inflation? So many Bolivians and neighbors, but basically Bolivians, some Peruvians and people from Ecuador also, began to enter Brazil. They usually get to enter to Brazil. The main route is from Corumbá. They go by bus, and they are mainly hired to work with the costura. How do you say that?
And the factories.
The factories with the clothes factories. But they work in São Paulo to the Koreans and Chinese. And they work, there are a lot of studies in Brazil and from sociologists and main other areas that treat the slave work that they are submitted in Brazil. They think, the government think that's about 200,000 Bolivians living in São Paulo now. But this is official number. They're much more than that. They have a neighborhood there in Bom Retiro, where they live. They have the cultural events, parties, and they have a feira, a marketplace, Feira Cantuta in São Paulo, where it's like a Bolivian market to Bolivians, not to Brazilians. They have a gathering, so it's forming a community in Brazil, Bolivian communities, mainly in São Paulo. Well, since I guess, I'm not sure, but I guess in 2004, there was an agreement, a Mercosul agreement, that since Bolivia entered Mercosul, that you can enter in the countries. You can be documented. There's no implications. It's not illegal. If I want to live I'm Brazilian, I want to live in Bolivia, I require the documentation and I get in. It's not forbidden, not very difficult work to do. So, what is happening? These Bolivians mainly don't know that they have this right. So they enter illegally in Brazil. They go with a tourist visa. It's called permiso in the borders, and they can stay like for 3 months, but they never go back. So since they are undocumented, this is the problem. So the Brazilian government in São Paulo each year calls for the documentation, and like 10,000 people show up and to get regular. So. This is more or less the legal situation. They can come in, and we can go, you have documentation. This is one point. The other point is the prejudice and stuff like that. That we can destroy more or less this myth of Brazil as the free land, Brazil as the melting pot. Of course, Brazil has a lot of ethnical faces. Everyone can be a Brazilian. Like a Japanese guy, black guy, white guy, whatever, But that doesn't mean that Brazil is not, there is not prejudice in Brazil and xenophobia, There's a lot. Since mainly in Brazil we have a prejudice, a social prejudice with the poor people, I'm like generalizing, but of course that it's a main feature of our culture, A lot of anthropologists in Brazil study that, and sociologists like Roberto da Mata, Gilberto Freire, and other classical literature in Brazil. So the Bolivians get this prejudice for being low class, low economic class people, undocumented, working as slaves in these factories, in the backyards, in São Paulo. They don't show up. They are like hidden people, So we are seeing that since they don't use the documentation, it's these agencies of trafficking people, trafficking these Bolivians to work as low wage workers. They don't have the Brazilian rights. The Brazilian working rights. They don't have holidays. They don't have retirement. They don't have anything. Like security, social security. For the workers. And of course, you mentioned just before that this otherness of the Bolivians are also because most of them that comes from the highlands of Bolivia in the west part of the country, they are what we call in Brazil Indios. They are the descendants from the Aymara, Quechua nations. So they don't get together. They don't get really mixed up with the São Paulo society. They got together with their parties, with their neighborhood, with their, more or less, like this ghetto neighborhoods in the United States that you have, like the Latino neighborhoods, the black neighborhood, the Armenian neighborhood. And that's not common in Brazil because in Brazil, our migration history is from the 19th century, basically. So these guys, the Germans, Italians, Japanese, they come in the 19th century, they got already mixed. But these new migrations are going to put new problems in Brazil that we are beginning to study. There's Sidney Silva, there's a sociologist in São Paulo University that's studying the Bolivian case. We have people from the University of Amazon that are studying the Haitian case from IT. Because Brazil has a military presence in IT, so we began to share, economic and political subjects. So these Haitians are coming from Amazon, from Manaus. They come from the Caribbean, Venezuela, and goes to Brazil through the river, through Manaus. So, this is basically the main migrants that comes to Brazil. And besides that, the Angolan people and Mozambique people, because of the language, but it's not like a massive, migration as the Bolivians are now. Because I work in Corumbá, and we have research over there, done over there, and we can see that it's kind of, each day, like 3 to 4 buses full of people from Bolivia. Like imagine each bus with 40 people, like 200, 300 people each day going to São Paulo to work. And we don't have a lot of discussions about that in Brazil in the government, because it's still treated as Brazil, the country of all. We are with our arms open to anyone. But in São Paulo government, they are beginning to, the Ministry of Work Ministry, they are beginning to investigate this slavery situation that the Bolivians are living in São Paulo. So this is the main things that I can tell you. But we have also, of course, this border migration, that people from a town to other, that Argentina and Bolivians that comes to Brazil for getting money with this border crossings. But this is another problem. It's another situation. It's not like people really going to another country to live and never come back to his hometown, maybe. It's on the border, people cross every day, so it's a different kind of migration, I guess. This is, I don't know if you have any more questions, but this is more or less what I know about.
Thank you so much.